Well, welcome to our March STEM Speaker Series. I want to give a shout out to our sponsor. So I've got this thing that I read every week, or every month, right? So our corporate sponsor is LHC Structural Engineers. LHC is a local engineering firm in Raleigh with more than 40 years experience designing diverse numbers of building structures, including hospitals, churches, corporate buildings, and college and university projects. A few of their notable projects include the Medical School for East Carolina University, the North Carolina Museum of Art, the North Carolina Museum of History, the North Carolina Aquariums at Roanoke Island, Fort Fisher, and Pine Knoll Shores. We are grateful for their funding and support, which makes this speaker series possible. Today we have Dr. Jamie Vernon, and I'm going to read his bio. Dr. Jamie Vernon is a North Carolina native who has mostly resided in the rural eastern part of the state. He graduated from John H. Hoggard High School in Wilmington and currently resides in Raleigh. He is the executive director and CEO of Sigma Psi, the scientific research honor society based in Research Triangle Park, and publisher of the society's award-winning magazine, American Scientist. He previously served as director of science communication and publications at Sigma Psi and editor-in-chief of the American Scientist. As an experienced molecular biologist, award-winning science educator, and an independent blogger, he has been a long-time advocate for issues in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. His research career has covered a range of topics, including evolution, genetic engineering, and HIV vaccine development. He has served as an American Association for the Advancement of Sciences Science Technology Policy Fellow and an Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education Fellow at the U.S. Department of Energy in Washington, D.C. In 2012, he was appointed co-chair of the Digital Media for the Interagency Climate Communications Working Group within the White House U.S. Global Change Research Program. He has earned a BS in zoology from North Carolina State University, an MS in molecular biology, and biotechnology from East Carolina University, and a PhD in cell and molecular biology from the University of Texas at Austin. So welcome.
Thank you. I want to thank Jackie for reaching out to me, and I'm going to mention today a little bit about social media, and I just want, it's an indication of the value that social media offers to the science community. Just the fact that she was able to find me through LinkedIn and just send me a message and invite me to be here. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to your students and those who are joining us online. I think that the story I'm going to tell you today is going to resonate with some of you because it's really about my life and my experience, what I would consider an unexpected career path, given where I come from. So I want to start by showing you this little introduction to a letter that is something I commonly get. Dear Dr. Vernon, I'm in high school. I was referred to you by someone. I'm considering pursuing a career in science, and it looks like you've done some interesting things, so I want to know how to succeed in science. I get this message all the time, probably 10 or so a month sometimes. And so I think about these issues a lot. How do you succeed in science? And most of the time, people are trying to look at my career path and say, can I follow his career path? And I'm going to show you my career path has been fairly non-linear. So I've gone all over and I've done a lot of different things, but I think that that's indicative of what you can do with a STEM career today, and I hope that you'll learn a lot from my experience. So the first thing I want to show you is my hometown. This is Sharpsburg, North Carolina. Does anybody know where that is? It's between Rocky Mount and Wilson. It's the intersection of Nash County, Wilson County, and Edgecombe County. Right there at the railroad tracks is the crossover to Edgecombe. The other way is Wilson, and that way is Nash County. We're a one stoplight town. I was a little kid there. I didn't know anybody who had gone to college as far as I knew. So here I am in this small town. This little boy. Who did have some inklings about science when I discovered dinosaurs as a kid. How many people really, dinosaurs turned you on to science, right? That's what got me into it. I mean, a 5-6-year-old kid who can spell Tyrannosaurus Rex is, that's a big deal. So I started to really get interested in nature. That's what drew me in. So I said that I wanted to be I thought, an archaeologist. I said I wanted to be an archaeologist. The truth is, what I really wanted to be was a paleontologist. But again, no one ever corrected me. So for a long time, I thought, I want to be an archaeologist because I want to look for dinosaurs. But archaeologists actually look at human history through the archaeological records. So it took me a while to figure out I wanted to be a paleontologist. But around the same time, I discovered astronomy. So once I learned about the planets and space and all the opportunity there, I then thought I wanted to be an astronaut. All right, so I was just a curious kid. Weather was interesting to me. And probably the smartest person that I encountered on a daily basis was this guy, Greg Fischel, who was our local meteorologist, and he still is today at WRAL. And because he seemed to be someone who understood data and facts, as a kid, I connected with him. I thought, this is my model. I was also interested in animals. Animals are cute. I had lots of pets. I asked my mother for a subscription to Zoo Books magazine, so I had these come, I guess, every month, and just learned as much, consumed as much as I could about animals. That made me think I wanted to be a veterinarian. And my grandmother, this was around, 1983, a good time to be an NC State fan, because that's the year they won the national championship in basketball. My grandmother was actually a basketball fan, an NC State fan, and I found out that NC State had a veterinary school. So I said, I'm going to NC State. There's only one school I'm going to. Well, as I developed my knowledge about biology, I realized that there were things we couldn't see with our eyes. I realized that we can really go to a very micro level and understand life, what it means life, how it works. And this became the thing that really drew me in my career. It's molecular biology, microbiology, and so on. So I started, as Jackie said, I went to high school in Wilmington, and I'm just going to point out here that in Wilmington, I had a major shift in my peer group. In Rocky Mount, where I really grew up, Sharpsburg area, a lot of the conversation about going to college was if I go to college. But something about my friend group in Wilmington, it was about where I'm going and when I'm going. That was a mindset that I hadn't yet accepted. I was just a small kid from a small town that didn't know anybody that had gone to college. So I said, well, everybody else says when and where. So where am I going to go? I'm going to go to NC State. And I did. After I did okay in high school, and I applied to one school, no backup plan. I applied to one school. If I didn't get in, I was going to go to community college locally until I could get in. And so I got into NC State. It was a great thing. I had, my counselor was on my side. She helped me get in. And I did okay as an undergraduate student. I majored in zoology, so I was on the path to be a veterinarian. But I think that the way that I liked to learn was not memorization. I didn't like just gathering facts and just building and building and building knowledge. I wanted to do something. That's sort of the way that I function better as a learner. And so I graduated with my zoology degree, and maybe I wasn't ready to go to vet school or med school. And I thought, well, maybe I could use a little more education. So I went over to ECU. My younger brother was a freshman at ECU, and I thought, well, I can go live with my brother. I can take some classes at ECU. I can strengthen up my resume, and then I'll go find the job that I want. That's when I met an amazing woman. Her name's Mary Farwell. And she was my advisor, my mentor while I was at East Carolina. And she thought I had potential, and you're interested, you love it. Maybe you're interested in doing research. And I said, well, I'd never done research before. Will you teach me? So she did. She brought me in her lab. She introduced me to her graduate students, and she taught me how to do basic molecular biology. This was the time of the DNA sequencing project, the human genome sequence. And as you know, Francis Collins and Craig Venter were racing to finish the complete sequence of the human genome. They finished in about 2000, 2001, but I was working on this research project in 1999, 1998. Turned out that what we were doing was trying to map a gene to a chromosome in the human genome. This was an old model for determining where genes were, because once the human genome was sequenced, we didn't need to do this method. So I was literally trying to complete this research project before the Human Genome Project sequenced through my region of the genome where we thought this gene was located, chromosome 12. It's really hard to see here, but right there, there's 2 little yellow dots on chromosome 12. I spent a full year and a half in a dark room trying to find those 2 dots. Statistically, I had to determine the data to verify that that was where the gene was located. I did it before the Human Genome Project got there, and once they sequenced through, they confirmed my data. So I had this little piece of DNA from the gene that we had sequenced, and I was putting a fluorescent tag on it, and I was putting it in the presence of these human chromosomes, and then exposing that, and we saw the signal where the gene was located. So we succeeded, and we mapped it, and we published the paper. That was my first paper as an undergrad. I was so excited. Well, that got me really pumped for doing research. I realized that whereas memorizing facts as I was trying to do it at NC State was working for me, but I was willing to learn anything that would allow me to do what I needed to do to answer this question. That's when I knew research is my path. So on to another lab. I applied to the graduate school. I got in for the master's program. And Dr. Jean-Luc Samama, a French professor based at ECU, was working on another project, looking at these genes called Hox genes that are expressed in the animal body plan. So genes at what we call the 3' end of the chromosome are expressed near the head, and then as you go to the 5' end, they're expressed closer to the tail of the body. So they're expressed in fruit flies, and they're expressed in mouse and humans, and they're always expressed in the body in the order in which they appear on the chromosome. So what we wanted to know, we were studying striped bass, because striped bass is a sport fish on the eastern part of the state, and it was a model organism that they were studying. It was unique to our lab. And for this type of research, I was trying to sequence one of the genes in the striped bass chromosome. And this is what a nice, pretty sequence looks like. When you run DNA sequence, you don't have to do it this way anymore, but you see a nice peak for C and this red peak for T and blue C. It's really nice and clean data. Well, when I was trying to sequence our gene, this is what. And we were so frustrated because I would repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And you guys who are thinking about doing research, it's a lot of failure and it's a lot of repeating. And then one day it clears up and you get the result. And the fact is that a famous author, Isaac Asimov, once said, the most exciting phrase to hear in science, the one that heralds, guy got it, but that's funny. So I knew I had clean data, DNA, but I could not sequence it, so I just kept working and cleaning it. And what it turned out to be was a great surprise. In fish, the genes that we know are present in mammals are actually duplicated again, right? So when I was extracting the sequence from my DNA sequence that would coordinate with a human gene, I was actually amplifying 2 different genes. So when I was able to separate those 2 genes, I could sequence them independently, and we determined that in striped bass, unique to its particular species, there were 2 genes that there were supposed to be only 1 in mammals. And so that was another success. We were able to publish this paper and show that the expression pattern for these 2 genes was slightly unique and different from what they were in mammals and other fish. So again, the reward for all the hard work I had done was showing something new. I was so excited. When I realized this, my Jean-Luc, Dr. Samama, was actually teaching a class. And I ran downstairs and I said, I had a note and I showed it through the door while he was teaching. And it said 2 genes. He didn't know what I was talking about, but here was his grad student in the hallway holding up this sign. I discovered something. And it was so exciting and so rewarding. And I just knew that I was doing the right thing, because this is what got my enthusiasm up. So around the same time, Dr. Stelwag, also another professor in the ECU biology department, sort of took note of what I was accomplishing. And in one of the classes that I took from him, I had apparently written a very thorough response to an exam question. And he said, based on your response to this question, I think you could pursue a PhD. I had never thought of pursuing a PhD to that point. The program at ECU was actually designed to create a workforce for all the biotech companies based here in RTP, and I thought that's what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to get this molecular biology degree. I'm going to go work for a biotech company. But based on his feedback, he inspired me to pursue a PhD. So I applied to another school. You can start to see the accumulation of education here, but it's all worth it in the end, I think. So I applied. Well, I think that they wanted me to stay at ECU and work with them on their projects and get my PhD there, but unfortunately they opened my mind to all the possibilities, and I applied all over the country, and I got several acceptances. Actually, all the schools that I applied to accepted. Texas put on a really great recruitment program, and I just had to go there. And Austin is also a really cool town. And this is Austin. And here is the University of Texas. And if you think about it, my hometown would have fit in this block, right? So my building is actually right over here, is the Moffitt Molecular Biology building. And so that's where I settled in for a good 7 years. I was actually there for 8 because I stayed for a short postdoc. But what I experienced there was something different than what I experienced at ECU. It was diversity. I recognized there's a Chinese researcher, there's a Japanese researchers, some US researchers, an Indian researcher, Chinese, German, Italian, Hungarian, and another German, and a Mexican researcher in one lab. And that diversity opened my mind, and we were a powerful lab because of the diversity of representation in that lab. We had all sorts of backgrounds of people, and we were all looking at a similar problem, and because of that diversity of thinking and background, we were able to think creatively about what research we were doing. And so there I appreciated the value of diversity on a team. So this was my little space for 7 years. I lived at this bench. Sometimes I shared it, sometimes I didn't. But this is what PhD looks like. I'm not very happy, you know. But I really enjoyed my time there. And what we were working on was something that was potentially game-changing. This is a video model of the type of product that we had created in the lab and that I was working to enhance. And you can see that this little molecule that's moving along the DNA strand, that's an RNA molecule looking for a specific sequence of DNA. And once it finds that specific sequence of DNA, it's able to cut that DNA and change it in a way that if it's a mutation, it can be corrected. If it's a gene you want to knock out, then it makes a mutation so the gene's no longer functional. So in the case of genetic diseases, we were working on a technology that would theoretically correct genetic diseases and knock out genes that were responsible for bad mutations in humans. And so that was my dissertation. This technology exists, but it did not come out of my lab. We were working on what I would consider the predecessor to what is now CRISPR-Cas9 technology. And so we were on the right path. We picked the wrong particle. But all of it collectively, the way science works, we all learn from one another. And so I feel like we made our contribution to modern-day genetic engineering for humans. And so you're all going to be faced with how this is going to change healthcare. You probably already heard about the Chinese scientists who have done this on humans, which is very controversial and leading to lots of ethical questions. And so you're going to have to wrestle with this if you stay in biology. Now, I didn't let research stop me in starting a family. While I was in graduate school, I married my wife and had my first child. That was an experience because she was born 2 months early while I was writing my dissertation. So I spent 2 months in the NICU writing my dissertation with my daughter in an incubator across from me, which was wild, but we did it. I actually had to push back my graduation for a little while, but I did it. And I was so thankful that I did. I didn't let it stop me. I just went for it. So because of that experience, it opened many opportunities for me. I went to another large campus. Does anybody know what this is? Oh. This is the NIH National Institutes of Health campus in Bethesda, Maryland, where some of the most incredible research in the world is done. And I was working in a building way back here in the back. It was put away from most of the people because the building that I worked in was a BSL facility where they handle very dangerous diseases. And I was working on HIV. So the HIV vaccine project that we were working on was designed to interfere with this reaction. So the GP120 protein on the virus interacts with the CD4 protein on the surface of T cells, and that allows for HIV to infect your immune system. And we were trying to create antigens, immune response, to block that interaction so that HIV can no longer infect those T cells. So we were essentially working on a cure for HIV. However, the curious person that I was writing about science. And then I started to build a relationship with the public by expressing my scientific experience, my expertise, and people started to coming to me for answers that they couldn't get from their doctor or otherwise. And I would write about it, I would blog about it. And then I started looking at what the federal government was doing to educate the public, and I was looking at laws that were being made to address issues in science. And I realized that maybe my impact, which is very incremental in the lab, maybe I want to go have a bigger impact by working in Congress or working on laws that will advance research. So I started doing that. I went and visited my senator, Senator Jim Webb, because I was living in Virginia at the time. Senator Jim Webb, I talked to him about my concerns about science and science policy, and that opened other opportunities for me, which led to this opportunity, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. What they do, AAAS, is the largest scientific organization in the scientific society in the world. They take scientists and put them in the federal government so that when the federal government's working on laws, they have the input of scientists who really understand these complex problems in science. And so we can make better laws that are what we call evidence-based policy. So I like arrows, so that's me. And all of these are brilliant people. I mean, these are some incredibly smart people who all want to bring science to the federal government. And so for the next 3 years, I worked at the U.S. Department of Energy, and I worked on what I considered to be the most important problem facing mankind, which is climate change, global warming. So I knew, and I had written a lot about the data supporting the case for what was causing the changes in the climate. I wanted to go work for the Department of Energy, which I did, to address that problem. And the way that I did that was I worked on a strategic policy analysis team that looked at the market for energy generation. So we've got fossil fuels, coal, oil, and we've got renewables, wind, tidal, solar, so on. And we were advising the federal government on where they should invest in the development of these new technologies. And so I did that for 3 years, but for 10% of my time, and this is important because some of you have your day job, but sometimes you're still interested in doing other things. For 10% of my time, I volunteered here. Not really here. But the White House has several offices that break out in the federal government that they oversee. They have their own budgets and so on. The Office of Science and Technology Policy is a branch of the White House that deals with science and technology. Under that is a group called USGCRP, U.S. Global Change Research Program. And I worked with people in OSTP and USGCRP to communicate the science of climate change to the public. So I didn't work in the White House. I worked next door to the White House on my 10% of my time at the Eisenhower office building. So this is where the vice president's office is, and this is where the president's office is. So OSTP is based here, and USGCRP is right across the street. So what we did was we coordinated all of the federal agencies that produce scientific data around climate change. We coordinated a communication and education program for them. So that work was very successful. I only did it for a year, but in 2012, when President Obama released the Climate Action Plan, a lot of what we had put into place was the methods by which that plan was communicated to the public and continues to this day. But while I was working with them, or after I left working with the USGCRP, some folks from Sigma Xi visited Washington, which we often do, and I do now on behalf of Sigma Xi. And they asked, well, we want to do some digital communications. We want to do some stuff for Sigma Xi that's similar to what you guys are doing. Is there anyone you could recommend? So my name was passed on to Sigma Xi. They invited me down to sort of consult with them for a little while. And I said, you need to do this, you need to do that. And they said, why don't you come and do that for me or for us? And that I accepted. And that made me the editor of this magazine, American Scientist Magazine, which we produce right here in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. I would say it's one of the premier science magazines in the world. It's actually printed in Vermont, but we produce it here. And it's distributed all over the world. So that was an opportunity I couldn't turn down. My belief was that my impact would be in communicating science to the public, particularly around issues of policy. And so that's a lot of what I do and did. So I came here to do that. And then, just the way I work, I sort of got involved in everything. And they said, well, maybe you should apply for the position of CEO. And that's how I arrived at my current position. So executive director and CEO is overseeing not only as publisher of the magazine, but all the operations of Sigma Xi. And that is pretty amazing, because among our members are Albert Einstein, Sally Ride, and Greg Fishel, the guy who influenced me as a child. And I told him this story when I saw him. This was in 2017. He was our keynote speaker at our annual meeting right here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it was such a thrill for me to meet him and be able to communicate to him the impact he had on my childhood. But to see that come full circle was pretty amazing. But Sigma Xi gives me so many opportunities. This is a kid that I saw in Moscow or St. Petersburg, Russia, after visiting Russia and Moscow and St. Petersburg. He's one of the top robot builders in Russia and therefore in the world. This is a picture from our annual meeting. This is me back in DC talking to the Einstein Fellows, which is a group of science educators that get brought to Washington, D.C. to do a similar thing for science educators that I did for scientists. They influence education policy based on their experience as science teachers. And then I was able to go back to my alma mater, NC State, and talk to their postdocs about similar to what we're talking about today. And I'm on the Advancement Council for the Biology Department of East Carolina University. So I'm giving back to the people who helped me do what I've been able to do. So this is my career in a nutshell. One of the things I want to point out is that while I was pursuing this day job, I always had little projects going on the side. These are all communication related. And it turns out that my little side project turned into my full-time career, which is pretty amazing. 10% of my time as a AAAS fellow led to the opportunity to work at Sigma Xi. So never underestimate your side projects. How does this story help you? It's really important. I hope you've already sort of seen some things that you can take away. But no two paths are the same, and you're going to have to apply these things as they come to you. But I want to say that a traditional academic career, science career, can be a long investment. Start out in high school, rushing. 20 years later, an associate professor or a dean. And it's a lot of work and a lot of time. But hopefully, there's some shortcuts if you pay attention. You can hack your science career path. You can speed up this process. You can go straight, linear path, straight to the professor track. You could make it to postdoc and decide you want to start a company and become an entrepreneur. You could finish grad school, go directly into industry, and end up as an industry executive or a manager. There's lots of career options for you once you get that science background. So I'm going to encourage you to think like a hacker, and I'm going to give you some suggestions. How do you attack the system and make it work in your favor? Find your passion, your motivation, what drives you. I found mine in biology, and then think of a problem related to your passion, because if you're doing something you care about, you're going to invest more. Determine the best way to address the problem. My initial thought was I want to understand biology. I understood biology. I did research to be able to learn more about biology, but then I realized that I wanted to have real-world impact, and that led me out of research. I needed to do the PhD in order to get to where I ended up, but the truth is that Ultimately, I was probably going to go there because that was where my strengths were and my interest. So if research is necessary to solve the problem, then these are some of the things you can use to succeed. You have to pursue the training to conduct the research. You need to build a strong professional network, obtain funding for the research, conduct research to understand the problem, publish your results, share that value of research with the world, and be prepared to pursue alternate paths to solving the problem. So let's start with pursuing the training. This is your traditional education setting, and this looks a lot like the classes at NC State that ate me up. Small town boy, 300 people in a classroom, no personal contact with the professor. That didn't work for me. I mean, I did okay, but it didn't really take me where I wanted to go. So one hack that I might recommend is seek training in non-traditional settings, settings that fit you. One of the ways you can do that, you can go to a smaller university, which East Carolina turned out to be. You can get that hands-on approach with a professor. ECU biology department's much smaller than NC State. It didn't gobble me up. I had one-on-one relationship with my mentor, and it worked. The other thing you can do is get skills through online courses, MOOCs and so on. They're on every subject, and a lot of times they're led by professors at the leading universities in the country, MIT, Harvard, Arizona State. I'm just naming the ones that I can think of that have lots of presence. You start here, and you build on that. You can take a MOOC and actually get college credit for it, but you got to follow the process. So there's guidance online to help you do that if you're trying to work towards college credits. 2, build a strong professional network. Your initial network is going to come from your mentors, your colleagues, your peers, your collaborators. I recommend that you look for people who share your values and interests. They may not have to look like you, but oftentimes that helps. If you have a shared value, something that you're both intimately passionate about, that person's going to be able to help you. But also think about people who don't think like you. Connect with them and show them your passion. And you need those people to be on your team to help you get to the next level. Mary Farwell helped me get into graduate school. My graduate school master's program helped me get into University of Texas. I had excellent recommendations because I had found that thing that worked for me, and my professors could just easily convey my excitement and enthusiasm for learning through their recommendation letters. Mentors and colleagues are critical to success. Hack, take advantage of professional societies for their mentorship programs. Sigma Xi is a great place to meet mentors. I'm not here to sell Sigma Xi, but I'm here on behalf of Sigma Xi, and we help students. That's what we do. And then there's a whole universe. And this is not even 1/10 of 1% of all the societies that you might associate with. But you'll see that American Indian Science and Engineering Society, there are some very specific groups that can help you or connect with you based on your interest. So look for those. Almost all of them have a mentoring component to them. And then obviously on your campuses. 3, obtain funding for the research. We all know the traditional path, or maybe you haven't experienced this yet, but going to the federal agencies and applying for their online portals is one way to do it. But you can also pursue independent and non-traditional funding opportunities. One example, or one reason to do this, is because of the trend in federal funding for research. Since 2010, we've seen a major drop-off. That's largely because of the economic crisis that hit us in 2008. This spike is actually the effort to throw money into research to sort of deal with that crisis. But then they didn't sustain that funding. So we all feel, the scientific community feels as though we're being cut. Funding is being cut. They put a bunch of money in, they didn't hold it, so now we're all sort of feeling like we're losing money. So this is a reason why you're going to want to look for other places. Crowdfunding platforms are growing in terms of ways to get small grants to do small research projects. There's lots of online websites for this. Experiment.com is a good example. Even Bill Gates says this is a solution to help fill the gap, or plug the gap for funding for unfunded projects. This is Ethan Perlstein. He was a postdoc who got frustrated with the entire research process, the system. He jumped ship, went to start his own lab, started his lab with crowdfunding, and now he's at a point where he's getting investor funding, and he's pursuing what he cares about, which are orphan diseases that don't get a lot of funding to address them because biotech or pharma industry doesn't see the upside, the profit opportunity in these orphan or rare diseases. So he said, I'm going to go get investors, I'm going to go get crowdfunding to do this, and he's now starting to succeed. Sigma Xi has a small grant program. If you apply for this grant program as an undergraduate or grad student, your professors are going to be so impressed, and you will have this on your resume forever. It shows that you can compete for a grant, and that just increases your likelihood of getting recognition down the road. Conduct research to understand the problem. Conducting the research is pretty obvious. You're going to go, you know what you need to do, or when you're on a project, you're going to know what you need to do. You have a mentor and so on. But there's ways to do the research. Number one, fail quickly. I did not know this, or I did not follow this guidance when I was in grad school, it took me 7 years. I was on a very difficult project. I refused to give it up. I was like a pit bull locked on. I was not going to quit. If you can test ideas quickly, get through the data, get the data as fast as you can, you will succeed. You will excel in grad school, and it will tighten up your time frame. Fail you will. So fail fast, so you should. Okay, listen to the great one. So the truth is, the number of data points you'll use in your thesis over the number of days you spend in grad school is a really sad number. It's a fact. And grad students have to come to grips with the amount of failure that we experience. But it's those moments when you do have the breakthrough are worth every bit of all the failure. So I say fail fast. Recruit help. You can do that from your peers, colleagues, and so on. But if your project lends itself to this, look at citizen science. Projects where you can crowdsource the data collection for yourself. There's a platform, Science Starter. There's lots of other platforms to help you connect with volunteers who can help you do your work. They'll collect, if you need data sets of insect populations or invasive species or something that you need nationally, but it's very difficult for you to get, citizen science projects are a way to do it. Be smart. Now, that seems obvious, but what I'm talking about is something different. Some teams are smarter than others, some research teams, and I gave you a little bit of an insight into this from my Texas lab. Teams with higher IQs didn't score much higher on our collective intelligence task than teams with lower IQ averages. What do you think it was in this particular project that was beneficial? Right. Teams with more women outperformed teams with more men. Women, on average, were better at mind reading than men, which means they're able to extract from your expression, your behavior, and so on. Communicated a lot, participated equally, possessed good emotional reading skills. So it's important for you to involve different backgrounds, different types of people, because they're going to approach a problem differently, and they're going to bring different skill sets. Those of you who have been in co-ed study groups know that there are people in that group who are more prepared, more organized than you are, and it's probably someone with a different background than you. Just to take that into consideration. We published an article in American Scientist called The Forgotten Father of Epigenetics about E.E. Just, who essentially proposed the concept of epigenetics, which is the idea that our social experiences do have an impact on our gene expression. He was basing that on his understanding of how certain people performed in life based on their social experiences. But he took that and applied it to the cell and said perhaps the cytoplasmic interactions on what's going on in the nucleus. And that's true. That's what epigenetics actually is. And so we credited him with as the father of epigenetics. This would have been the biggest improvement to my research career. Learn project management. If you're going to be in STEM, you need to know how to run a project. You need to think about a research project sort of on a time scale. How many experiments do you have to do? In what amount of time? And what do I have to do to prepare to do that concurrently or consecutively, whatever? But planning your projects is critical. Grad students go in, they haven't been trained on this, they just start doing, and they just keep doing, and they pile up things, and it's not organized usually, and they don't learn until they're in their 4th or 5th year that if they had planned all this, they could have done it in half the time. So learn project management. There's lots of online certifications for this. If you're at a major research university, they probably have a business school or an engineering school. If you're in biology, they don't think like the engineers do. Go to the engineering school, say, do you have a project management course? Go to the business school, do you have a project management course? That will change your life. You will have an advantage over every graduate student that's in the program with you, I guarantee it. Publish your results. Obvious, you have to do that to succeed. I'm going to recommend that you consider the traditional subscription publishing process and what comes along with it. Libraries purchase your subscription, the journal that publishes your product, but the public has to pay per article to view. Now, I went into science because I wanted to change the world. I wanted to serve the public. The research that I did was funded by taxpayer dollars. I wanted taxpayers to have access to what I had done. So today, open access journals are on the increase. I think it's important that published versions of articles be immediately accessible to the public. Therefore, I do support the open access publishing model. And it will help you as well, because your research gets to the public. If I'm working on HIV vaccines, or I'm working on a cure for a disease, those patients want to read the articles to know where things stand in terms of their likelihood of them surviving. So it's important for us to make this information available. Research disciplines that have close industry ties, and this is not a knock on industry, but it's a reality. The research fields that have close industry ties are the most closed fields, versus math and physics, where it's very much open, collaborative research. No one's necessarily building a business model on a physics outcome, right? Not always, sometimes. But those that are not as closely tied to industry are often the most openly available. So we want to, in some ways, to change this. We want to find a business model that works, that serves the public and gets the information out to them. So there's a couple of examples: Science Advances and PLOS. Just to give you an example, these are the bones of one of the skeletons discovered in the project, Naledi. It's of Homo. And they chose to publish in eLife, which is an open access journal. And what they found is almost 160,000 page views for their story, 16,000 downloads of their article. That's unheard of for a research publication, and it's because news was driving the story, but it was available to the public, right? Share the value of your research. I give this is a separate talk in and of itself, how to do this. But I always say to scientists, if a tree falls in the wood and nobody hears it, did it happen? Apply that to your research. If you find a great discovery and nobody knows about it, did it happen? What's the impact of it? You have to share it. So let's walk through this real quick. Imagine a circle that contains all of human knowledge. By the time you finish elementary school, you have a little bit of knowledge. By the time you finish high school, you know a little bit more. A bachelor's degree, you gain a specialty. A master's degree deepens that specialty. This is my story of my life. Reading research papers takes you to the edge of human knowledge. Master's degree in reading papers. Once you're at the boundary, you focus, you push at the boundary for a few years, until one day the boundary gives, and that dent you've made is called a PhD. So of course the world looks different to you now, because you've changed it, right? So what are you going to do? This is the world of knowledge. I suggest that you share that knowledge, and it'll be a better world and a happier world. Okay? Now the challenge here is that there is a science news cycle. There are journalists out there looking for your research. But working with journalists, and I support journalists, I have lots of friends who are journalists in science journalism and so on, but working with journalists can sometimes be like a game of telephone. You remember that game where you tell the first kid one thing, and by the end of the time it gets to the end of the room, it's totally different. That's essentially what this shows. It says, for immediate, scientists find potential link between A and B. A causes B, scientists say. A causes B all the time. Why don't you know about A can kill you more at 11? I'm wearing this to ward off A. Right? That happens so often in science where it's just miscommunicated. So how can you combat this? Hack. Communicate your science your own way. You can communicate your science. One of the platforms, Twitter, is a good place to start. This was a study done of conservation scientists that showed that of those scientists who participated in the study, 45% of their followers were non-scientist media or the general public. So when you're a scientist on social media, there's a lot of people that are not scientists, that are not following you because you're in their field, but because they want to know about what you do. Something interesting, and you'll care about this if you're a researcher, is that interactions with reporters being mentioned on Twitter can contribute to a scholar's scientific impact. Those of you who understand what scientific impact is, that's the evaluation that you use for promotion, tenure, and jobs. So interacting with journalists on social media can increase your scientific impact. Most importantly, being mentioned on Twitter amplifies the effect of interactions with journalists and other non-scientists on the scholar's scientific impact. So you've got multiple ways of influencing your scientific impact just by communicating in social media. Most people at the early part of their career don't think about social media as a tool for advancing their research, but it is. So be prepared to pursue alternate paths to solving the problem. Now, this has PhDs, but it could be anyone. You're going to enter into the mix of STEM education, and you're going to come out. You should be prepared to take any of these pathways. Again, going back to your passion and going back to what you think is the best way to solve the problem that you've found in your passion. Hack, create your own career path. This is a quote that I carry around in my wallet. Far better is it to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows not victory nor defeat. I've had this on my desk at every job I've ever had. In my research lab, it was taped over my research bench. You're there, you're trying to change the world. Accept defeat when it comes, but power on because it's all worth it. And I'll say, passion led us here, passion led me here. Hopefully passion will take you where you want to go. You are now a science hacker. Happy hacking, and thank you. How'd I do on time? 8 minutes for questions. No questions? Yeah.
I just wanted to know maybe some of your, because I've seen you've done like a lot of DNA mapping and chromosome mapping on autism. Have you had any exploration in that?
I have not. And I would say that those who are working on that have not yet determined what the genetic relationship is yet. I mean, we don't even know that it is genetic. It could be environmental. We don't know. Whether it's environmental in the womb, outside after birth, we don't know. So that's a rich area of research, something I encourage you to go into because those breakthroughs haven't happened and you could participate, you could contribute to that. That's the thing. Looking at the landscape of problems out there, what do you care about? And how far down the path are they to that? That's where you can sort of position yourself in your career. Are there questions lingering that you might be interested in trying to answer? That's how, in graduate school, you're going to be asked to do, what do we call them, qualifiers, where you have to do essentially a literature research, and you have to come up with a research problem that needs to be addressed, and you need to propose a research program for addressing that problem. That's part of qualifying to even become a PhD candidate. So your first 2 years, you have to do that. That's not the research you're going to do, but it's just understanding how you look at the landscape, the ecosystem of research. You identify a problem that needs to be addressed. You understand the methods enough to propose an approach to answer that question. And that's what a PhD teaches you. And then you take that, once you qualify as a candidate, apply it to your real full-time research project. But that's how you do it. Yeah. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you for coming. We have a small gift, token of appreciation. And then, so we do a drawing, and I would like you to draw the winner of the gas card.
All right. Gas card.
Yes.
Can I read it?
Sure.
Casey Layton.
For you.
Here? Oh,
Awesome.
congratulations. Pre-PA.
Thank you very much. Our next event is this Friday. It is the STEM Day on the South Campus. And then our next STEM speaker is April 24th. See you there.
And I have swag up here if anybody wants a copy of the magazine, a frisbee, a button, or a pin.